Okay. So a quick programming note here. Our friend Phil was taken ill, but he's good, he's fine. He just couldn't make it today. So we have Sujoyee is with us today from Channel Factory. But if we think about this session and this conversation, marketing with a conscience, and thinking about like conversations like DE&I and how do we make choices that we want to make, but how do they sometimes fly in the face of business outcomes, right? How do you harmonize those two things? Because they are all important. And we have to be considerate of them, and we also, obviously, these are businesses, marketing. So that's what we're gonna have this conversation next. We're really lucky, the leader of this conversation is going to be Micahel Learmonth. He's a true journalist. I introduced him yesterday, for those of you who saw him, and he's coming back up here to do this again. But it's a very lively group, so get ready for this one. And Micahel, please come on up and bring up your panelists.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, you're welcome, thank you.
Good to see you. All right, so we got Sujoyee, Chatterjee, and Jasmine, Presson, and Kanene, Holder. You got it right. Yeah, so we're here to, I mean, obviously the name of this panel is talking about how brand safety, efforts may or may not be making the internet dumber, and also quite possibly defunding news. So my concern as a news person is that we're seeing kind of a grand decoupling of brands and journalism that has sort of, funded the fourth estate, kept it strong for generations, and now that bond seems to be weaker than ever. And I can throw out some stats on that. Newsroom employment's down 26% from 2008. That's as of 2020, so let's just call it 30 at this point. A 77% drop in newspaper ad revenue, whatever a newspaper is at this point. Obviously, lots of innovation happening in news. And then 70 million people living in so-called news deserts. So I think that's kind of the context, at least my concern or my interest in this. But so I want to start out with you, Jasmine, because you're sort of implementing this stuff and overseeing it. How does brand safety actually happen inside an agency, and where do you see it possibly harming the kind of content you want to be supporting?
Yeah, so there's technology, but at the end of the day, it's all us people that are operating it, right? And it comes down to every advertiser, the individuals that are involved, and the institutional culture of that brand, and risk tolerance, the degree to which they're trying to avoid showing up in certain places or lean into and be purposeful in the company they're trying to keep, the type of content that they're trying to monetize with their ad dollars. I mean, at the end of the day, they're spending the money to get consumers to buy their goods. How we're monetizing the type of content we show up in is not necessarily the primary goal, but I think we're seeing a lot more consciousness about that as part of the equation. And the technology is catching up with the needs of people, just as it does in every part of our industry. Video streaming matured far before the ad-supported inventory is maturing. So it really comes down to working with each advertiser to understand both the amount of risk tolerance or the importance of inclusion and monetizing certain voices, news, diverse voices, and then working with partners, who are all kind of all over the map in terms of how developed the technology is, to be able to implement that and try to create the best possible results for the client, while also minimizing the chance that there's a screenshot of some ad running next to some article that comes down from a CEO to a CMO to the brand manager to the media manager. How did we end up here? And which is a human experience that diverts resources from other brand building efforts.
Can we talk about that for a second? Because I think every conversation about brand safety either starts with that or ends with it. This idea that there's some kind of adjacency, whether it's plane crash or someone who's died or news, right, is somehow like the kind of catastrophe that we would build an entire industry around trying to avoid. I mean, is that really so bad? Is that like the worst thing we're talking about here?
I mean, to some degree, I think, yes. Like, is it bad for the brand long term? Maybe yes, maybe no. It's probably a drop in the ocean and very hard to measure the impact that it has. But for the people who are marketers and for their agencies, it has legitimate impact in our work days and our ability to focus on brand building efforts.
Can I add something here?
Of course.
I think we actually did a study with Magna Trials and IPG, which does show that misaligned content or content, whether it's something that's harmful, if content is placed next to that, then what is the impact it does, not just on conversion, but also on further impact. So we actually do have figures around that. So I do think that it's not just one big myth that's kind of blown out of proportion, that you don't want to be a travel company next to the most cliche one, right?
Yeah.
A travel company next to a crash.
I'm glad you have a study. I think like the IAB did a study a few years ago, the brand Halo study, that showed the benefits of news. I think though that there's just like not a lot of science around this, right? It seems like there's a lot of assumptions around, and it feels to me like the biggest thing is like I just don't want to get screamed at by my boss, or like I don't want like a nasty tweet out there, right? Is that fair?
I mean, it's partially that, and also legitimately, as Sue's saying, there is research that content alignment matters. Like, that's the reason we're trying to show up next to certain kinds of content. That's why direct buys still show up on our media plans, is to show up in a specific environment as a brand, whether it's institutional mythology or really data-driven. I think it's probably a mix of the both in terms of its effectiveness.
And why do we?
But I don't think it's just like someone doesn't want their boss screaming at them. We clearly are not all in this room today just because a handful of people got screamed at by their bosses. There's got to be more to it.
I think it's more than this, because I'm gonna tell you a little bit about my personal story here, right? So I'm a mom of 2 kids, and they're very small. They're still on milk, formula, whatever you call it. And 2 years ago, Similac came up with an issue where there's still a lawsuit going on about things that came up in the milk powder, right? So here I am where I don't have options, and I'm sure so many of women would agree with me where you may have experienced the same thing, where all of your aisles, everything was run out with milk powder, so you didn't know what to give to your kid, because that's food for them. But also at the same time, when you're actually going back and you're scrolling through your feed or you're just reading news, you have Similac's ad, or sometimes you'll have ad of different alternative milk powders, and then just 2 scrolls down, you have a lawsuit where they say that this many kids were impacted, died, or horrible things that have happened to them. So now as a mom, rather than me going to a competitor buying different milk powder, alternative methods, I'm actually thinking, should I just transition my kid too early from milk powder completely to solid food? Talking to the doctor about it. So it does, forget brands, forget everything else. I'm talking from a more personal level, and I bet that every single person in this audience will have a story that they can connect and talk about that way, where they've seen a news and they've seen something very bad about it, not the same brand, and they cannot go back to the same thing.
If I can add, I think your story is a great pivot to what I want to talk about. We are data points, and we're actual human beings. There's data that you can do, there's charts and graphs, but the actual human being is not an abstraction. The actual human being sees, hears, feels, mourns, feeds, right? We're living in a world where we're constantly navigating, as the analogy, I will say it, we're navigating farts. We're navigating a world full of farts. And somehow we make it through the day and we get to the next day. And I think there's a balance between the data and the risk mitigation and the real world implications of trust the customer, trust that human being, because we're all human beings. We figure it out, and to a certain degree, the customers are not necessarily looking at brands, gotcha. They're not waking up, I'm gonna get that ad, I'm gonna get that brand today, I don't believe. They're not living in the world of gotcha. They're living in the world of their kids, their grades, their boss, their whatever. So I think it's a balance between respecting people's organic autonomy to navigate the world and parts, their lives, and to a certain degree, the data, which does prove that, negative interactions or negative brands next to, negative content next to a brand may have a dip in some type of intent towards sales, right? I think to put eggs in only one basket and not also respect the fact that people are going to people, as well as the internet is going to internet, I think is a slippery slope in terms of a world that doesn't exist. We don't exist in the synthetic world of everything's happy, look at this brand, buy it, right? So we have to be able to say, if we're too tame, it's lame. We have to lean into reality.
I agree with that, as a former Vice employee.
That was for you.
So can we just talk about keyword blocking? A huge issue for Vice, for the news in general. What kinds of content are getting harmed by that, do you think? And where is it appropriate and inappropriate? Just throw that out to all of you.
Well, I think I'm going to take the other side of it. So one of you can volunteer and talk about the keyword blocking.
No, I mean, we are using blunt instruments and trying to develop ones that have nuance, right? Because there is news coverage, that like we want to show up next to. There are diverse creators, on the internet in general, especially on like YouTube and such, where part of what they talk about in a positive way, in a way that will resonate for your consumers, talking about racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and if these are things that show up on your block list, there are important voices that are probably company you want to keep, that you are not keeping because of the blunt tools with the keywords. So, we're really excited by what a lot of our partners, and I'm sure a lot of you in this room, folks in the ad tech and publishing community are doing to try to make these blunt tools more nuanced, so we can be more specific in both the company we're trying to avoid and the company we want to keep.
I'm going to add on to that.
Do it.
So pretty much, I'm going to bring it back to a personal story again. This is one of the main reasons why I joined Channel Factory. So keyword blocking, I've been in the brand safety industry for a while now. While it started with keyword blocking and making sure that you don't appear to what is deemed bad, I feel like it's moving towards how do you actually define bad? Because if everything that is different is bad, and we're blocking pretty much everything, then where exactly are you appearing? So I think that's one of the stories that I learned like during one of my interviews at Channel Factory, and I absolutely loved it. The conscious project, giving power back to the people who are talking about diversity, who's talking about different things, not just like the straightforward media, and just making sure that there are people, there are agencies, there are advertisers out there who want to be appearing next to it. And I connect to that personally as a Southeast Asian person, as a mom. I connect to that, and I think that story has become more than just a project that I feel like a lot of partners are just like playing around with, inclusion. I think it's become a big part of our whys, like who are we? Every single individual in our company has a story about that. And I love that because we bring it together, and it's actually conscious business performance now. So every single thing, every single communication we're having, whether it's with an advertiser agency, the whole tone has changed from, and I love that, the whole tone's changed from, oh, I'm going to solve a problem for you today, to, which is just limited to, money solve problem, ROI or anything. It's more about, okay, you've given me a problem, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to be a partner. I'm not going to just, tell you this is the best outcome for your business. I'm actually going to be an advisor and tell you to diversify your spend and look at corners that are being hidden just by keyword blocking and block lists. There's got to be creative ways of doing it, and we have a dedicated R&D team who actually does that, and I absolutely love that. So.
Yeah, if I can also share really quickly, I really appreciate both of you, and specifically the notion of a blunt tool, right? We live in a world that is requiring us to be more and more nuanced. The younger the consumer, the more discerning and demanding they are of brands. They just know their level of savvy, media literacy, they're consuming content, they're producing content. And so if we're just keyword blocking people, creators, content, what does that mean for the younger generation that is going to be looking and seeing, why is this brand missing? Why is this conversation missing? Why is this content being amplified? Why is something else being demonetized? They're going to notice that. And they're going to ask more questions. And the worst thing to happen with the brand is when people start asking questions. So to me, it's all about leaning into the narrative. Control the narrative. Lean into a little bit of chaos or a little bit of the unknown. Because at the end of the day, if you're too safe, the kids are going to figure that out. Like, your silence isn't silent. They hear it. They hear the silence. They see you missing. You're still being seen. You're still being heard, even if you take the safe approach.
I love that about leaning into chaos, right?
I mean,
at least just
sorry.
a little bit, right?
A little.
We all will have our own tolerances for it. But I think a lot of this, at the end of the day, comes down to a sense of control and a challenge with giving up control. You know, It was not that long ago that, we were, as agencies on behalf of advertisers, choosing exactly which TV network at exactly which hour, in which program, in which ad pod, in which position in that ad pod, or in this particular issue of this title on C2. Like, we were picking really specific places, and there was a whole lot of control for everyone in terms of understanding what we were buying, and for the advertiser in terms of understanding where they were going to show up. And with programmatic, like, that all goes out the window. And so we're figuring out, like, how do we have some of that semblance of control, but I think also not slip into old habits just for the sake of old habits, and really challenging, to your point, Michael, like, is it helping our effectiveness, both in being a brand and where we're showing up, the company we're keeping, as well as getting in front of the right people in a relevant context, not just reaching, but building relevance in terms of our interactions with consumers.
This is so true, because the way we consume media has changed, right, over the years. And I think it has drastically changed the voices as well. So think about 2019, right? Life was different for all of us out here, right? Life was completely different, things were different. Then you had COVID, everything changed. The way we communicate with media changed, because now we have really great platform, TikTok, Facebook, where we can actually, you have real people, real voices there, right? So it's, while on one side, from a platform perspective, we are actually empowering them to speak their truth and be out there and represent themselves and not like sugarcoat things. On the other hand, what we are telling you is, but if you do that too much, we're going to punish you. That's probably not the right way to go about it.
Isn't there also like a relevance danger for brands? I mean, if you're avoiding news or challenging stuff or isn't there a chance that you end up marginalizing your own? I mean, my experience advice was, brands would come to us and they want to do things with us, and they're like, hey, we know your advice, but could you come over here and make some meatloaf over here for us, right? It's like, we can, but this is the very desired content that our readers actually love us for, right? And you're not a part of that. Like, that's, to me, that is like crazy. And I think there's potentially, a relevance issue if brands don't take part in the content people really want and that is actually adding value to their lives.
I think that's changing, right? Because exactly to what you said, is that it's not C2, like it's not, this is where I want to be anymore for a brand anymore, right? It's more about diversifying it. I feel like even as a brand, 5 years ago, what the budget used to look like when they would come to a media versus now when it's coming forward is a lot different. I feel like as long as we're not completely damaging somebody's reputation by doing 100% wrong about to what they think is wrong, there's always a way. And I feel like I don't want to keep bringing back conscious program here, but that's what being conscious, doing something around conscious advertising means. It means finding that way where there's a right balance between your GARMs, high, medium, low. Are you really going low or are you going a medium? Like, there's always that difference where you still can be inclusive, you can still be out there, you can still represent everybody and still not get banned for that or canceled for that as a brand. I think there is a way.
Is that a real concern, like getting canceled, for your clients?
Sometimes. I mean, that is the risk, right? That, again, is like why there's this whole summit, why so many people in the room have the jobs that we have, right? That there's a real concern over backlash, and I think even in the case of, like working with Vice or not working with Vice, part of it is a brand figuring out to what degree that is a fit, because like you don't want the partnerships to feel tone deaf. You don't want the, knowing your ad campaign and its messaging, what kind of content is it going to feel tone deaf showing up next to? While at the same time, like the struggle for maintaining control of our brands, and that in conflict with like the need to start to open up our brands and co-sharing the ownership of our brands with the consumers, who are the ones that like ultimately make our brands, right? And it's a struggle, and it's change, and it takes time, and it's gonna be unpredictable because we're humans and we're not completely predictable, right?
I think a good example, I will say this, is Nike. Nike took some calculated risks over the past few years, and Nike is in control of their narrative to the degree that people see Nike as an extension of themselves. Netflix and chill, another example where a brand is like, yo, we're so in the culture that people define themselves by our brand to describe what they're about to do. And that's because of a risk, right? These are disruptive brands. So are you a brand that's disrupting and maybe once in a while alienating a segment of the population, but owning the narrative? Are you a brand that wants to sustain itself, kind of neutral, but sustaining? Are you a brand that's making bad decisions, bad choices, not understanding the market, aligning yourselves in ways that are actually going to be canceled? I think every brand has to constantly, every cycle, and every news cycle, honestly, reevaluate who are we? How do we want to live our brand story in society? Because society, Gen Alpha, does not want to be in a full-time job. They do not want to be C-suite. They want to be the entrepreneurs. They want to be the next Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. So they're going to create brands to outbrand your brand because they're so authentic and they know what a fandom is. So again, we need to think about what does it mean to be a brand, right? And how do you then continue to live out your legacy in a way that inspires the next generation to endear themselves to your brand and not for them to create the next competition to your brand?
Those are great points. I mean, I sort of feel like the real brand safety issue that we saw play out over the past year is like, the Bud Light, Target,
Yes.
Dodgers, right? Like, those brands did nothing wrong. They did nothing wrong, and yet they were in the middle of a firestorm through no fault of their own, right? But really the reason this is happening is you've got the quality news defunded and getting smaller, and I'll tell you what's getting bigger, and that's the partisan news getting bigger. And that's, they exist on creating and perpetuating and then canceling your brands. They love it, right? They'll dine out on it. And I think that's kind of the real brand safety issue out there now, not like some weird juxtaposition or, that like causes a few tweets. I think these are whole news cycles that you'd have to deal with. I think the way, and like to me, the way to avoid that, or the only defense is to play the game, participate, be everywhere, and don't be so sensitive.
Can I wear my product hat once for a minute and explain this? So I think that's where the navigation part comes in, right? So if you want to be everywhere, but also at the same time, bringing back the last question, you want to make sure that you're not canceled, right? You're not badly seen, reputation damage as a brand. There are ways to navigate it from a product standpoint, right? And it depends on how or what level your product is built out to do. And that's where I think not just Channel Factory, all of our companies come in. The broader blocking would be blocking, let's say, for example, a channel. Somebody said something bad in 2007, I'm going to block them forever. Gone, right? And that's how it blocks every single thing that's associated with that channel. Whatever that particular creator represents, whatever they stand for, if that particular creator's channel was blocked in 2007 for my brand, anything else that particular creator represent, I'm going to block it. That's the broader side of things, right? And then in terms of bringing it down, Now I feel like we're in a place where most technologies are going, what about this piece of video they made yesterday? But what about this piece of video? And then sort of like take an average and say, am I still blocking this creator or am I not blocking this creator? I think that's the navigation part, because you can still be everywhere, right? But at the end of the day, it still comes down to who are you showing yourself to, right? And I'm going to give a makeup brand example here. So whether it's L'Oreal, whether it's whoever you can think about, yes, they can advertise to the majority population, for sure. And they might get their revenues met, whatever their CTA looks like. But at the end of the day, I think their specialty will lie in how many shades they've created. And in order for every shade that a particular makeup company's created, the only way they're going to make sure that there's sort of equal balance in selling them is if they show those shades to the right people. And the only way they can do that is if they don't overblock, but also show up everywhere.
Don't block. That's the lesson. Don't
I
block.
did not say that. Not my bad.
Well, the red light says we are out of time, so I want to thank you guys for taking my tough questions and for sharing your knowledge with these folks.
Thank you.